What is the most horrific thing that someone has told you, super casually? A couple of years ago, I was on one of those music festival cruises. I was sitting down waiting on my friends to finish their drinks and whatnot, when this lady sits down next to me. Somehow we get to talking about dogs. I tell her about mine. She tells me that hers is a comfort dog. I didn't ask her to elaborate because it wasn't any of my business, but she tells me it's because she hasn't left her house for 5 years. Again, I didn't ask why. She went on to tell me, a perfect stranger who she'd been talking to for all of 5 minutes, that her ex-boyfriend was stalking her and broke into her house, so she had to shoot him and kill him. When I was a little kid, sometimes I'd imagine that inanimate objects could talk. Like one time my parents took me to the store to get a new winter coat. They had me try one on and then decided to buy it. And in my head, the coat was telling me how it had been waiting a long time in that store for someone to choose it off the rack, and now it was so excited that it got to come home with me and be my coat. And my parents could see that I was excited about my new coat, and they even let me wear it as I walked across the store to the checkout aisle. But on the way there, they saw another coat on a different rack. And my mom said to my dad, "You know, that one looks a little better made. I think we should buy that one instead." And I burst into tears. I couldn't explain to my parents why I was so upset. Even then, I knew that the conversation with the coat had really been in my imagination, and that coats couldn't really be disappointed the way people can, but it just felt so sad. I can't even imagine how someone can tell an actual human kid they'd changed their mind about adopting them. I usually work with kids in facilities. We had a boy come in, about 10 years old. They had him on a 72-hour hold because he threatened to kill a classmate at school. We got those often, and most times it was just a kid being a kid and ends up being caught, and we are forced to treat it as real. No big deal. Well, it actually was a huge deal. He would keep fidgeting in his chair and on the ground. I'd always say, "Tom, try to keep still, okay?" Or, "Tom, if you're getting restless, you can walk around the table if that helps." At lunch, I was asking him how he was doing, and he said it's weird to sleep all by myself. Some families bed share with siblings, so this wasn't way out of line. I said, "Oh, do you sleep in bed with your sister?" And then he dropped this on me. "No, Daddy likes to sleep in my bed, but I don't like it because it always hurts my bottom." Now I'm like, fuck in my head. They tell you not to express emotion if the kid isn't so as cool as I could say, "Oh, why's that?" And he told me all about how Daddy played a poking tickle game, but he can't show me what it is because he's not allowed to tell anyone. Guys, I wanted to cry. We ended up having to take him to the emergency room for an anal exam, which confirmed his dad had been anally raping him for so long that he couldn't remember a time it didn't happen. That's only one of many horrible stories I have from that job, and now I need a drink. Just remembering it makes me feel sick and shaky with anger. I hope his dad is slowly tortured for the rest of his life. When I was in college, there was this guy who would hang around me sometimes that seemed just a little bit off, but he was nice and we both had similar interests, so we hung out. One day, after I hadn't seen him for weeks, he tells me it's because the police were interviewing him. He tells me this story. Him and his 2 friends were in the woods shooting a .22 caliber pistol. Friend number 3 tries to fire and it doesn't go off. Friend number 3 looks into the barrel to check the gun. The gun then goes off, firing the round in there and then the next round, shooting him twice in the face. You read that correctly. 3 guys went into the woods with a .22 caliber pistol. 2 walked out, and the third was shot twice in the face and died. Anyone who knows anything about guns knows this is basically impossible. But since Guy and friend number 2 both had the same story, and the cops had no way to prove otherwise, no charges were filed. I stopped hanging out with that guy forever. A guy I worked with said that in the late 80s he lived with 5 other guys in an apartment in New York. Sometime after the HIV test is developed, all of the roommates agree to get tested. Apparently the results were mailed to them. Basically, one guy got the mail and opened everyone's test. In doing so, he finds out one of the roommates has HIV. He shows the test results to every roommate except the guy who is HIV positive. Then they destroy the test results. They all pack their stuff and abandon the apartment and the HIV positive guy. None of them ever spoke to the HIV positive roommate again. They never told him the test results. The guy I worked with laughed so hard telling me the story. It's fucked up. The guy I worked with had no remorse or a second of compassion, even 30 years later. And knowing the HIV positive roommate probably died. Who knows how many people the unknowing HIV positive guy may have unknowingly transmitted HIV to before he had serious symptoms. JP, if you're reading this, fuck you, heartless bastard. I was on a date with a girl, and everything was going okay. Not amazing, but definitely still in the range of a second date. At some point, the conversation wasn't even sexual. She said that one of her favorite memories was regularly letting an older guy tie her up in the back seat and drive around sharing her with random people off the street when she was 15. It was at that point I decided there would not be a second date. Edit. The conclusion that I bailed because I immediately viewed her as damaged goods or whatever is completely off base. There was other behavior to suggest she needed help from someone qualified to do it, and I felt that it wouldn't be healthy for either of us to pursue a relationship together. Also, it seems like there's a few predators around here that need to get the fuck out. Oh, I accidentally did this recently. I was telling my boyfriend about how this girl I knew stalked me in October/November of last year. I hardly knew her, but she sent me some really aggressive and threatening messages, and would get really angry if I didn't answer her immediately. She actually non-consensually kissed a friend of mine and harassed another. After a few days of this, I cut contact with her and blocked her. After telling my boyfriend all this, he said something like, well, if she tries anything like that again, you could beat her up. And I just said, oh, no need to worry about that. She's dead now. Obviously complete shock on his face. I really should have led up to that better. Basically, I found out she had passed away in February for completely unrelated reasons. It really shook me up for a few days, but like I said, I didn't really know her. Of course, saying it the way I did was pretty callous of me. My mom was in the ER in September 2019. She had stage 4 colon cancer and was in a lot of pain and other stuff. The doctor came in and just basically said, well, you have some heart failure and your liver is failing, and just walked out. WTF. My mom died 14 hours later from septic shock that they did not tell us but had wrote it down in her chart. Ugh. Makes me so angry writing it. Edit. Wow. I had no idea this would get that much attention. Y'all are more sympathetic than my therapist. Thank you to whomever gave the award. I don't know what it means, but thanks. Edit 2. My mom was actually getting treatment in Houston in July 2019. She had sepsis then, and her oncologist told her to call all family and friends, as if something happened, it would happen quick. Her sister was the only one with her then, and the rest of the family was 8 hours away. We hauled ass there, and her doctor was shocked that she was okay. We met with him after she got out of the hospital there, and he said there is nothing else we can do, but go to your local hospital, and they might have something, or we recommend you go on hospice. We were crying hysterically, and the doctor had to actually walk out of the room because he started crying. So, we came home, and she met with local oncologist 2 hours away. He was rude and didn't understand why she was trying to get treatment close to home. She was supposed to have blood work done every week, I think. The day before she passed away, she went to her primary doctor and was 5 or so minutes late, and they canceled her spot without calling. Apparently, they don't realize people with cancer get weaker and weaker and are going slower than normal. Not that having that appointment would have changed the outcome, but holy shit, we could have had a warning or something. When she was at the local ER, the doctor said she needed to be transported to a better hospital for people with her condition. This was at 8 a.m. She didn't get transferred until 3:30 p.m. to a hospital that was 3 hours away. When my aunt and I got there, she wasn't responsive. She was at the local ER. I had to call my dad and younger brother and tell them she wasn't going to make it. That was the hardest thing I have ever done. Life has been a fucking disaster since she died, as she was the glue that literally kept everything together and everybody getting along. I've been so depressed and angry since everything. Okay, so I'm a server at a senior independent living home. Don't know if this is relevant or not, but anyways, was serving a table one day with 2 gentlemen and a woman. I'd like to point out that the woman is one of the most rude and all-around horrible person, so she's the main character, I guess you can put it, in this scenario. Anyway, they're chillin' when she decides to tell them about her son who had passed away when he was younger, a very long time ago apparently. We all said we were sorry and stuff, but she just sort of chuckled and said, "Oh, don't worry about it. He had so many physical and mental disabilities, he looked like a monster. I'm glad he died when he did. I was so embarrassed being out in public with him." She said it so casually, like she didn't give 2 fucks. It was horrific/shocking to hear such a thing. The gentleman and I literally sat there for a good 30 seconds just staring at her like, did you seriously just say that? A middle school girlfriend told me she was sexually abused by her stepfather and that her previous boyfriend mocked her for it. I was scared, but I was too young to really understand the implications, or what I should do or what I could do. She didn't want me to tell anybody, so I didn't. So she just kind of grew up as a sexually traumatized rebel teen, had 2 kids by the time she'd graduated high school, and never got professional help. I hope she's okay, but I know she probably isn't. Also, on 3 separate occasions, I've had 3 different ex-military coworkers get very casual about the stuff they saw in Iraq/Afghanistan. One openly admitted to being complicit in the abuse of innocent civilians. One talks about chasing down rebel fighters and executing them as they begged on their knees. They're all openly racist against anybody vaguely Middle Eastern. Learned a lot of new racial slurs from those guys, unfortunately. When I was 5, I was home alone, and I just felt like something was wrong that day. I couldn't put my finger on it, but later that day my mom said she had to go to town for some groceries and would be right back. Please don't leave or freak out. Well, about 15 minutes after, an officer showed up to the front door and knocked. He kind of seemed distant when I remember him. Anyways, he asked me if my mom was home and I said no, she went to town. I should mention we live in a rural area. This was common. The officer then just looked at me straight in the eyes and paused for maybe a second and just said, "Your father shot himself under a bridge a few miles away. Here's my card. Give it to your mother when she gets back and have her call me. Good luck, kid." He then turned around, got in his Crown Vic, and drove off without another word. I zoned out. I couldn't remember the next 3 days, all I try. Really fucked up, man. Edit for context. Yes, that was irresponsible of my mom. And I'm not defending her. She did some fucked up stuff growing up. I found out when I was 21 that my mom was the one behind him killing himself. She would call and yell at him and refuse to let him see me. She was married to him, and they were separated. She was addicted to Xanax at the time, and so she would be passed out for hours and hours at a time. So I guess that's why she felt okay with doing that. But yeah, she still has a note from him I've never seen. She feels too guilty about it. May not super fit 100%, but it was pretty horrifying for me. The first psychiatrist I went to after being horribly depressed for years after I left the Navy. After I finished unloading a huge part of why I was so miserable, the first thing she said was, "That's depressing," shrugged, and poured her 3rd Coke of the session, all in 20 minutes, into her big gulp cup. The next thing she says is, "Oh, BTW, you don't qualify for being seen here, but we can still finish the session if you want." When I visually got upset at this whole situation, she said I could come back a couple more times in the meantime, till I found a different place to go. As you can probably guess, I didn't finish the session, and I never went back. Just the callousness and disregard for other people's mental state while calling yourself a psychiatrist was and is disgusting. Side note, in the 20-minute session, she also offhandedly mentioned how she was scamming the government. She lived in the area by the office, but she was taking just one online class at some school in San Fran, because the cost of living is higher there, so the post-9/11 GI Bill will give me more money. That bill gives you money for rent and food. You get the same amount even if you only take one class. During grad school, a couple classmates and I had been to visit a professor on the second to top floor of our building. When we were leaving, we got in the elevator, and there was already a middle-aged gentleman in the elevator. The three of us joined him on the ride down. As often happens in elevators, we were all silent while we rode downward. Just before the doors opened, the guy out of nowhere asks, "Do any of you know what a snipod is?" We all exchanged looks, and one of us said no. The guy shrugged and got out of the elevator onto the ground floor as we continued to the first basement. It was one of those buildings where the front exit was on one level and the rear exit was on a different level. It was odd, but he seemed pretty normal and good-natured. As we walked to our cars, we were halfway across the parking lot when I pulled out my phone and Googled it. Turns out snipod means sniper tripod, as in the thing a sniper would use to mount his sniper firearm of choice. I announced this to my two classmates, and we all kind of pondered in silence for a moment, until one pointed out that we had been on the second to top floor, and the guy was already in the elevator going downward, meaning he had been on the top floor, or the roof. I worked at my uncle's business for about a year during college. He's in the floral industry and has some high-profile customers, housewives of OC, works with event planners that deal with celebrities, YouTube people, high-end companies, etc. Really cool. One day, I was ringing up an older lady and her friends, and we were chatting about stuff, just casual. And turns out her husband went to the same school I was attending, and for the same major. I was intrigued because I've met quite a few accountants there, and always had nice chats about their jobs and careers, pretty motivating. Chat continues. She tells me about her, asks what plans I have after college, and I tell her I want to pursue a CPA license and that I have a job lined up with a prestigious firm. She then says in a condescending tone, "Oh wow, how did you get a job there? They don't hire just anyone." I was weirded out and tried not to make much of it and told her I've had my offer for a few months. As I'm handing her her receipt, she says with a giggle, "I suppose you're still going to be working here while you study for your CPA. I mean, you're already used to being poor, am I right?" She had a huge grin and walks away. I was left speechless and felt like complete shit. Melinda, from Yorba Linda, California, fuck you, old woman.